The massive crystal halls of Nexus Prime had never seen such chaos. Emergency lights flashed red across the dome-shaped chamber where the Galactic Council met. Representatives from hundreds of worlds filled the floating seats, their voices creating a storm of angry sounds in dozens of languages. Elder Counselor Vextar raised one of his forearms, and silence fell across the chamber. His species, the hegemony, had ruled the galaxy for over 10,000 years. When he spoke, others listened. "Bring forth the ancient archives," he commanded. The floor in the center of the chamber opened and a pillar of pure white light rose up. Within the light, old stone tablets appeared, floating in the air. The writing on them was so old that most species had forgotten how to read it. "These tablets are older than most of your civilizations," Vextar said, his voice echoing through the chamber. "They contain warnings written by races that no longer exist, and they all say the same thing." The tablets glowed brighter, and words appeared in the air above them, translated into every language in the galaxy. Never pursue the humans beyond their borders. Never corner them. Never make them desperate. Council member Taman of the Korthak Empire stood up. He was young for his species, only 300 years old. His red skin showed the anger marks that his people displayed when upset. "These are just old stories," he said loudly. "Humans have only been traveling in space for 200 years. They are weak. They have small ships and few weapons. How dangerous can they be?" Many of the younger council members nodded and made sounds of agreement. The humans were known across the galaxy as traders and explorers, not warriors. They avoided fights when possible, and tried to make peace with everyone they met. But the older council members looked worried. They remembered stories their grandparents had told them, stories about things that happened long ago in distant parts of the galaxy. Vextar's eyes glowed with ancient knowledge. "You think because they seem peaceful now, they will always be peaceful. This is a mistake that has been made before." Far across the galaxy, Captain Hyunwoo stood on the bridge of the human exploration ship Determination. He was looking at star charts when his communication officer, Lieutenant So-Jin, turned to him with a worried expression. "Captain, we're getting an emergency signal from Earth Command." Hyunwoo walked over to the communication station. "Put it through." The face of Admiral Park appeared on the screen. He looked tired and stressed. "Captain, we have a situation. 3 of our colonies in the Outer Rim have gone silent. New Busan, Haven, and Prosperity. All communications stopped 12 hours ago. Could it be equipment failure?" Hyunwoo asked, though he already knew the answer. "Negative. We sent scout ships. The colonies are gone, Captain. Completely empty. But there are Korthak Empire ships in those systems." Hyunwoo felt a cold feeling in his stomach. The Korthak Empire was one of the most powerful military forces in the galaxy. They had been expanding their territory for the last 50 years, taking over planets from smaller species. "There's more," Admiral Park continued. "The Korthak Emperor has sent us a message. They claim those worlds as liberated territories now. They're giving us 72 hours to give up our claims to 17 star systems, or they will begin what they call total pacification of human space." The bridge of the Determination went very quiet. Everyone knew what total pacification meant. It meant war. Back on Nexus Prime, the council was voting. Taman had convinced most of the younger members that the ancient warnings were just superstition. The Korthak Empire was strong and humans seemed weak. Many council members thought it would be good to let the Korthak take human territory. It would keep them busy and stop them from attacking other species. "I call for a vote," Taman announced. "All in favor of allowing the Korthak Empire to proceed with their expansion into human space under the Manifest Destiny Protocol?" Hands, claws, tentacles, and other appendages rose around the chamber. The vote was clear. The council would not help the humans. Elder Vextar watched the vote with sadness in his ancient eyes. After the session ended, he walked slowly to his private chambers and activated a special communication device. It had not been used for over 5,000 years. On a research station orbiting a dead star, Dr. So-Young was working late in the archaeology lab. She was a human scientist who studied ancient alien cultures. The research station was home to scientists from many different species, all working together to understand the history of the galaxy. Dr. So-Young was looking at some tablets that had been found in the ruins of a very old city. The tablets were covered in writing that she was trying to translate. Most of it was warnings about different dangers in space, but one section kept mentioning humans. "That's strange," she said to herself. These tablets are at least 8,000 years old. Humans weren't even in space then. She worked through the night using her computer to help translate the ancient text. Slowly, the meaning became clear, and what she read made her blood turn cold. The warnings were not about humans as they were now. They were about humans as they became when they were pushed too far. The final tablet, so old that parts of it had crumbled away, contained just one phrase in Old Korthak language. The sleepers wake when their young are threatened. Dr. So Young sat back in her chair, staring at the words. She had studied human history. She knew what humans were capable of when they felt their families were in danger. But these tablets were written by aliens who had never met humans before. Unless they had. She began searching through her database, looking for any mention of humans in ancient alien records. What she found made her realize that the galaxy's understanding of human history might be completely wrong. Meanwhile, deep in space, something was beginning to stir. In the darkness between stars, old ships that had been drifting for generations suddenly received a signal. Computers that had been in sleep mode for decades began to wake up. Navigation systems calculated new courses toward human space. These ships had been waiting in the dark for 200 years, waiting for a signal that their creators hoped would never come. But now the signal had been sent and they were coming home. Back on Earth, President Chan Ho stood in the war room, surrounded by his military advisors. The reports coming in were getting worse by the hour. More human colonies were going silent, and Korthak ships were being detected throughout human space. "Sir," said General Dong Jin, "our fleet is ready to defend our core worlds, but we don't have enough ships to protect all our colonies. If the Korthak are really planning to attack all 17 systems at once, then we'll lose most of our people," the president finished. He looked at the star map showing human territory. Red marks indicated where colonies had gone silent, or where Korthak ships had been spotted. "Sir," said Admiral Junho, "I recommend we pull back to defensive positions around Earth and our core worlds. We can't win a fight against the entire Korthak Empire." President Chan Ho was quiet for a long moment. He thought about the families living on those distant colonies, the children who were probably scared and hiding while alien soldiers searched their homes. "No," he said finally, "we don't abandon our people. Send out the recall signal, sir." Admiral Junho looked confused. "What recall signal?" "Code 77 Alpha. Send it on all frequencies." The room went very quiet. Code 77 Alpha was in the military database, but it was so old that most officers had never seen it used. It was a signal from the early days of human space travel, back when Earth was sending out the first colony ships. As the signal went out across human space, carried by communication relays and emergency beacons, something began to happen in the darkness between stars. Ships that had been silent for generations began to power up their engines and turn toward the sounds of battle. The war was about to begin, but neither the Korthak Empire nor the Galactic Council had any idea what they had just awakened. Admiral Korthvak stood on the bridge of his flagship, the Destroyer of Worlds, watching as his massive fleet prepared for the largest military operation in galactic history. Through the viewscreen, he could see thousands of warships stretching out into space like a metal ocean, over 10,000 vessels, each one armed with weapons capable of destroying entire cities. The Admiral's red skin showed the excitement marks of his people. This would be glorious. The humans had refused the Empire's generous offer to surrender peacefully. Now they would learn what happened to species that defied the Korthak Empire. "Begin the operation," he commanded. "Hunt down every human ship in space. Force them back to their little blue world where they belong." The fleet spread out across dozens of star systems, moving like a giant net through space. The plan was simple. Find human ships, attack them, and force them to run deeper into uncharted space. Eventually, the humans would have nowhere left to run. On the colony world of New Busan, Lieutenant Binwoo was trying to save as many people as he could. The Korthak ground forces had landed 3 hours ago, and the small human defense force was losing badly. "Get the children to the evacuation ships," he shouted to his squad as laser fire lit up the sky around them. "Civilians first." Binwoo watched as families ran toward the ships, parents carrying children who were crying with fear. The Korthak soldiers were not just conquering the colony, they were studying the humans. He saw them taking pictures, collecting biological samples, and documenting how humans acted when they were scared. This was not normal conquest behavior. The Korthak were treating humans like laboratory animals. Lieutenant, one of his soldiers called out. They're blocking the evacuation routes. They want us to see what they're doing. Binwu looked through his scope and saw something that made his blood run cold. The Korthak soldiers were not trying to capture the colonists quickly. They were purposely making the evacuation slow and terrifying, watching how humans reacted to different levels of fear and stress. They're experimenting on us, he whispered. High above the planet, engineer Mijin was working frantically on the colony ship Hope's Dream. The ship's communication system had been damaged by Korthak fighters, but she thought she could fix it long enough to send one message. Come on, she muttered as she connected the last wire. The communication panel flickered to life just as Korthak interceptor ships appeared on the scanner. This is Hope's Dream to any human fleet, she broadcast. Emergency message. The Korthak are not just pushing us back. They are hunting refugee ships targeting evacuation vessels. They are taking samples from civilians and studying our reactions to fear. This is not conquest, this is experimentation. A Korthak energy beam struck the ship, and the communication system exploded in sparks. Mijin was thrown against the wall, but she had managed to send the message. Somewhere in space, human ships would receive her warning. The message reached Earth just as President Chan Ho was meeting with his war council. Admiral Junho played the recording, and the room fell silent as they listened to Mijin's words. Experimentation, the president repeated quietly. They're treating our people like animals in a laboratory. Sir, said General Dongjin, we're getting reports from 17 different systems. The Korthak are not just attacking military targets. They're specifically hunting civilian ships, colony transports, even medical vessels. And they're not destroying them quickly. They're capturing them. President Chan Ho stood up and walked to the large window that looked out over the city. Below him, he could see children playing in parks, families walking together, people living normal lives. But on distant worlds, other human children were being hunted by alien soldiers who saw them as test subjects. Admiral Junho, he said without turning around, you suggested we pull back to defensive positions. Yes, sir. It's the only way to protect our core worlds. And leave millions of our people in Korthak hands? Sir, I know it's hard, but we can't fight the entire Korthak Empire. We just don't have enough ships. President Chan Ho turned around and the expression on his face made several officers step backward. They had never seen their president look so cold, so angry. You're wrong, Admiral. We do have enough ships. Send out the recall signal. All frequencies, all channels. Authorization code 77 Alpha. Sir, what is 77 Alpha? It's a call for help that we hoped we would never have to use. Across human space, the recall signal spread from one communication relay to another. It was an old signal, using frequencies and codes that most people had forgotten. But in the darkness between stars, automated systems that had been waiting for 200 years finally heard the call they were programmed to answer. Deep in space, so far from any star that no light reached them, massive ships began to wake up. These vessels had been drifting in the void since the early days of human space travel. Their crews in deep sleep, their computers patiently waiting for a signal that meant humanity was in danger of extinction. The first ship to respond was the Vengeance of Terra. It had been traveling in the darkness for 187 years, carrying 50,000 humans who had volunteered to sleep in space until their species needed them. As the ship's computers received the recall signal, they began the process of waking the crew. Captain Yujin of the human science vessel Discovery was running silent near the edge of human space when her sensors detected something impossible. A massive energy signature was moving toward the war zone, but it did not match any known ship design. Communications, try to contact that vessel, she ordered. Captain, I'm getting a response. Audio only. A voice came through the speakers, speaking in an accent that sounded like Old Earth English, the language humans spoke before they reached the stars. This is Captain Morrison of the Vengeance of Terra, responding to recall signal 77 Alpha. Please identify yourself. Captain Yujin felt confused. There was no ship called Vengeance of Terra in any human fleet database. This is Captain Yujin of the Discovery. What is your origin point? Earth, Captain. Launched in the year 2157. We've been waiting in the dark for 187 years. That's impossible. How long have you been traveling? The voice that answered her made her blood run cold. Since the last time someone tried to exterminate us, Captain. We were hoping this day would never come. but it seems the galaxy has forgotten why our ancestors sent us into the dark. On the Korthak flagship, Admiral Korthak was receiving reports from his fleet commanders. The operation was going well. Human ships were running from his forces just as planned, but some of the reports were strange. "Admiral," said his communications officer, "we're getting reports of human ships appearing in systems where our scouts detected no activity before, ships that don't match any known human designs." "Explain." "Sir, the human ships we know about are small, lightly armed exploration and cargo vessels, but our forward scouts are reporting contact with ships that are much larger, and they're not running from us." Admiral Korthvak's excitement marks began to fade. "Show me." A recording appeared on the screen. It showed a Korthak scout ship approaching what looked like a human vessel, but it was easily 10 times larger than any human ship in the databases. The Korthak ship sent the standard demand for surrender. The human ship's response was simple: "No." Then the recording went to static. "How many scout ships have we lost?" The Admiral asked. 47, sir. All in the last 6 hours. No distress calls, no energy signatures indicating battle. They just disappear." Admiral Korthvak stared at the screen. 47 ships, each one crewed by experienced warriors, gone without a trace. "That was not possible unless send out a fleet-wide communication," he ordered. "All units are to report any contact with unknown human vessels immediately, and order our advance forces to pull back to support positions." For the first time since the operation began, Admiral Korthvak felt something he had not experienced in many years of conquest. He felt afraid. In the deep space between stars, more ships were waking up. Ships with names like Never Again, Remember Earth, and The Long Sleep. Ships that had been built for only one purpose: to ensure that humanity would never face extinction. The sleepers were awakening, and they were very angry. Admiral Korthvak paced back and forth on his command bridge, staring at the tactical display that showed the progress of his great invasion. What he saw should have made him happy, but instead it filled him with growing concern. Yes, his forces were winning. Human colonies were falling. Human ships were retreating, and human space was shrinking every day. But something was wrong with the pattern of the war. "Show me the casualty reports again," he ordered his aide. The holographic display changed to show numbers that made no sense. His forces had destroyed hundreds of human civilian ships and captured dozens of colonies. But his own losses were climbing steadily. Not from major battles, but from small attacks that came from nowhere. "Sir," said his intelligence officer, "the human resistance is not decreasing. It's becoming more organized. What started as scattered refugee ships has become coordinated fleet actions. They're hitting our supply lines, our communication relays, our fuel depots, and they always seem to know exactly where to strike." Admiral Korthvak studied the reports. Human attacks were no longer random or desperate. They were precise, carefully planned, and devastatingly effective. Someone was coordinating the human forces, teaching them how to fight back. But who? According to intelligence reports, the human military command structure had been disrupted in the first wave of attacks. There should be no one left to organize this kind of resistance. Commander Sun Ho floated in the command chair of his converted cargo ship, watching as his small fleet of refugee vessels approached a Korthak supply station. His ships looked like harmless civilian transports, but hidden beneath their civilian exteriors were weapons that his people had built from salvaged parts and pure desperation. "Remember," he broadcast to his fleet, "we're not trying to win a glorious battle. We're trying to hurt them so badly that they think twice about chasing us." His fleet consisted of 12 ships, former mining vessels, colony transports, even a luxury passenger liner that had been converted into a weapon of war. None of them should have been a threat to a military space station. But Sun Ho had learned new ways to fight. All ships. Execute attack pattern 7. The converted ships spread out and approached the station from different angles, broadcasting civilian distress signals. The Korthak defenders, thinking they were seeing another group of refugees, prepared to capture them for experimentation. They realized their mistake too late. The refugee ships dropped their disguises and opened fire with weapons that had been designed by engineers who had studied every weakness in Korthak technology. Instead of trying to fight the station's powerful shields, they targeted the specific frequency generators that powered them. Instead of attacking the heavily armored command center, they destroyed the life support systems that kept the crew alive. Within 10 minutes, The supply station was drifting dead in space, and Sun Ho's fleet was already jumping to hyperspace with coordinates for their next target. On the other side of the galaxy, Dr. Yunji was trying to stay alive in a Korthak research facility. She had been captured when Haven Colony fell, and for the past week, she had been forced to watch as her captors performed experiments on human prisoners. The experiments were not meant to kill, but to understand. The Korthak scientists wanted to know how humans reacted to fear, pain, and desperation. They were trying to map the exact psychological breaking points that turned ordinary humans into dangerous enemies. What they had found terrified them. The subjects show remarkable adaptability. Dr. Yunji heard one of the Korthak scientists say to another, "When we increase stress levels beyond what should cause complete psychological breakdown, they don't collapse. They evolve. They become more dangerous, not less." "What do you mean?" asked the second scientist. "Watch this recording." Dr. Yunji saw them pull up a video of a human prisoner who had been subjected to increasingly harsh treatment. But instead of breaking down, the human had started studying his captors, learning their weaknesses, planning his escape. The recording showed him systematically disabling security systems that the Korthak thought were impossible for prisoners to understand. "This is not normal behavior for any species we have studied," the first scientist continued. "Most creatures become less intelligent under extreme stress. Humans become more intelligent. It's as if pressure turns them into something entirely different." Dr. Yunji understood what the scientists were discovering. They were learning what humans became when their families were threatened, when their children were in danger, when their very existence was at stake. They were learning why the ancient warnings existed. On the Korthak homeworld of Korth, Emperor Vashitar was reading reports that made him remember stories his grandfather used to tell him. Stories about the old days, when the Korthak Empire was young and had to fight many wars to establish its power. "Your Majesty," said his military advisor, "our long-range sensors have detected massive energy signatures moving toward the conflict zone. The readings are unlike anything in our databases, but the energy patterns appear to be human in origin." Emperor Vashtar looked at the sensor data. The signatures were enormous, larger than entire Korthak battle fleets. But that was impossible. Humans had small ships, limited technology, and a tiny military force. "How many signatures?" he asked. "Over 200, Your Majesty, and more are appearing every day." The Emperor was quiet for a long moment. His grandfather had told him stories about the early days of the Empire, when they had fought wars against species that no longer existed. One story in particular came back to him now, a story about a species that seemed weak until it was threatened, and then became something that even the mighty Korthak Empire had chosen to avoid. "Send a message to Admiral Korthvak," he ordered. "Tell him to be careful. Tell him that some enemies are more dangerous when they are cornered." Captain Yujin stood on the bridge of the Discovery, staring at the massive ship that floated in space before her. The Vengeance of Terra was 10 times larger than anything in the current human fleet, and it was not alone. Over the past day, dozens of similar ships had appeared throughout human space. "Captain Morrison," she said into her communicator, "what exactly are your orders?" The voice that answered her was calm but carried an edge of cold anger. "Our orders are simple, Captain Yujin. We were sent into the dark with one mission, to ensure that humanity survives any attempt at extinction. The recall signal indicates that this mission is now active. But where did you come from? How did ships this large get built without anyone knowing? When your people first reached the stars, Captain, they remembered the lessons of history. They remembered what happened to species that put all their hopes in one place, that trusted their survival to the kindness of others. So they sent us out, generation ships filled with volunteers who agreed to sleep in the darkness until humanity faced extinction." Captain Yujin felt a chill run down her spine. "How many ships like yours are there?" "Enough, Captain." "More than enough." As if to demonstrate his point, the space around the Discovery suddenly filled with massive ships dropping out of hyperspace. Ship after ship appeared, each one larger and more heavily armed than anything Captain Yujin had ever seen. "These are our reinforcements?" she asked. "No, Captain. These are our advanced scouts. The reinforcements are still waking up." Across human space, similar scenes were playing out. Ancient ships with names like the Final Hope, Terra's Vengeance, and Children of Earth were appearing in systems throughout the war zone. Their crews spoke in old accents and wore uniforms that looked like they belonged in museums. but their weapons were unlike anything in current military databases. Admiral Korthvac received his final transmission from the advance fleet at 0347 hours ship time. The message was short and filled with static. Admiral, this is Forward Scout Group 7. We have encountered human vessels of unknown configuration. Sir, they're not running anymore. They're hunting us. Request immediate reinforcements to Grid 77 Alpha. The transmission cut to silence. Admiral Korthvac stared at the communication panel, waiting for more information. But no more transmissions came. Forward Scout Group 7, over 500 warships, had simply vanished from all sensors without sending a single distress call. Communications, he ordered. Send a fleet-wide alert. All units are to maintain maximum defensive posture and report any contact with unknown human vessels immediately. But even as he gave the order, Admiral Korthvac knew that something fundamental had changed in this war. The humans were no longer running. They were no longer trying to escape. They were preparing to fight back, and something told him that when they did, the galaxy would remember why the ancient warnings had been written. The crystal halls of Nexus Prime shook as emergency alarms echoed through the Galactic Council chambers. Elder Counselor Vextar rushed to his position as representatives from across the galaxy filled the floating seats, their faces showing panic and confusion. "What is the meaning of this emergency session?" demanded Council Member Taemin, his red skin showing the stress marks of his people. Vextar activated the central display, and the chamber filled with images from long-range sensor arrays positioned throughout the galaxy. What they showed made several council members gasp in shock. "These readings were taken 6 hours ago," Vextar announced. "Long-range sensors have detected what appears to be a human fleet of impossible size emerging from deep space. Over 300 vessels, each one larger than anything in current human military databases." The display showed energy signatures moving through space like a slow storm, converging on the systems where human and Korthak forces were fighting. The readings were massive, single ships that registered energy outputs equal to entire battle fleets. "That's impossible," Taemin protested. "Humans don't have ships that large. Their entire fleet consists of small exploration vessels and cargo ships." Vextar's ancient eyes glowed with knowledge that stretched back thousands of years. "You forget the warnings, young Taemin. The tablet spoke not of what humans are, but what they become." He activated another display, and the oldest archives appeared in the air above them. The ancient tablets glowed as their warnings were translated into every language in the galaxy. "When you drive them from their homes, they adapt," Vextar read aloud. "When you hunt their ships, they improvise. When you threaten their children, they remember." "Remember what?" asked a council member from the Crystalline Alliance. "What they are capable of becoming," Vextar replied quietly. On Earth, General Dongjin stood in the command center, coordinating the largest human military mobilization in history. But the forces gathering around Earth were not the ones anyone had expected. Ships arrived daily, but they did not appear in any military database. Vessels that looked like they had been built for one purpose only: war. Their crews disembarked speaking languages that were almost, but not quite, modern human standard. "General," said his aide, Lieutenant Park, "the new arrivals are requesting permission to establish a command structure separate from our regular military." "What do you mean separate?" "Sir, they say they operate under different rules, different laws. They've been authorized for unrestricted warfare." General Dongjin felt a chill. "What does that mean?" "I think it means they don't follow the same rules of war that we do, sir. The Geneva Conventions, the Galactic Accords on Civilian Protection, none of it applies to them." Before the general could respond, alarms began sounding throughout the command center. On the main display, a new signature appeared, a ship so large that the sensors had trouble measuring it accurately. "Sir," called out the sensor operator, "we have a massive vessel dropping out of hyperspace. Sir, it's the size of a small moon." The ship that appeared above Earth was unlike anything anyone had ever seen. It was clearly human in design, but built with technology that was decades ahead of anything in current human space. Its hull was black as space itself, and weapons arrays covered its surface like mechanical scales. "This is the command. Ship never again requesting permission to assume fleet coordination," came a voice over the communication system. General Dongjin activated his microphone. "This is General Dongjin, Earth Defense Command. Identify yourself." "General, this is Admiral Minsu of the Sleeper Fleet. We are responding to recall signal 77 Alpha. We are here to ensure the survival of humanity. Admiral, I need to understand what we're dealing with. What exactly is the sleeper fleet? There was a pause before Admiral Minsu answered, and when he did, his voice carried a weight that made everyone in the command center go quiet. General, when humans first reached the stars, they learned from history. They remembered what happened to species that were not prepared for extinction. So they sent us out, volunteers who agreed to sleep in the darkness between stars, developing weapons and strategies for the day when humanity might face total annihilation. How long have you been out there? 200 years, General. We've been preparing for this day for 200 years. Dr. Hygen floated in the observation deck of the space station Unity, watching as ships arrived that seemed to belong in science fiction stories rather than reality. As the newly appointed liaison between baseline humans and the arriving fleets, she was trying to understand exactly what humanity had become. Dr. Hygen, said Captain Morrison as he entered the observation deck, thank you for agreeing to this briefing. She turned to look at him and was surprised by what she saw. Captain Morrison looked human, but there were subtle differences. His movements were too precise, his reflexes too quick, and his eyes seemed to see everything at once. Captain, I need to understand what I'm dealing with. Are you still human? Morrison smiled, but it was not entirely comforting. We are what humans become when they are shaped by the requirements of total war, Doctor. We are still human. But we are human adapted for survival in a galaxy that wants to destroy us. What does that mean? It means we don't think like you anymore. We don't feel like you anymore. We were bred and trained and modified to ensure that humanity survives no matter what the cost. Dr. Hygen felt a growing sense of unease. Modified how? Faster reflexes, enhanced intelligence, improved physical capabilities, and most importantly, we don't suffer from the psychological limitations that prevent normal humans from doing what needs to be done. What needs to be done? Morrison walked to the observation window and pointed at the Korthak fleet that could be seen in the distance. Those aliens have been experimenting on human children, Doctor. They have been hunting refugee ships and studying how we react to fear and pain. They have violated every rule of civilized warfare. His voice remained calm, but Dr. Hygen could hear something cold and terrible underneath it. Our response will be proportional to their crimes, Morrison continued. But I want you to understand something, Doctor. We are not bound by the same moral constraints that limit your people. We were sent into the dark specifically to do the things that normal humans cannot do. Admiral Korthak stood on the bridge of his flagship staring at sensor readings that made no sense. His advance fleets were disappearing faster than he could track them. Not destroyed in battle, simply gone as if they had never existed. Admiral, said his communications officer, we're receiving a transmission from the human fleet. Put it through. The face that appeared on the screen was human, but there was something about it that made Admiral Korthak's skin crawl. The human looked normal, but his eyes were the eyes of a predator that had been hunting for a very long time. Admiral Korthak, the human said, this is Admiral Minsu of the human fleet. We are prepared to discuss terms for your surrender. Admiral Korthak's anger marks flared bright red. Surrender? You think your pathetic fleet can threaten the might of the Korthak Empire? Admiral, let me explain something to you. You have been fighting the humans who chose peace, who chose exploration, who chose to be civilized members of galactic society. Those humans are still trying to follow the rules of war, still trying to be merciful. Admiral Minsu leaned forward, and his smile was like the smile of a shark. We are the humans who chose a different path. We are the humans who were sent into the dark to prepare for the day when mercy would not be enough, and that day has come. The transmission ended and Admiral Korthak stared at the blank screen. For the first time in his military career, he was afraid. On the edge of Korthak space, Captain Seok-Jin led a small fleet of the new human ships toward a research station where captured human civilians were being held. The station was heavily defended, protected by energy shields and weapon platforms that should have been able to destroy any attacking force. But Captain Seok-Jin's ships were not like anything the Korthak had ever faced. They moved through space in ways that seemed to violate the laws of physics, and their weapons struck with precision that turned the station's defenses into scrap metal. Within an hour, the research station was under human control, and Captain Seok-Jin was walking through corridors filled with holding cells where human prisoners had been kept for experimentation. What he found there would ensure that when this war ended, The galaxy would remember why the ancient warnings had been written. The sleepers had awakened, and they were everything the old tablets had said they would be. The Korthak homeworld of Korth had never known fear. For thousands of years it had been the center of the most powerful empire in the galaxy, protected by defense systems that could destroy entire fleets before they came within 1 billion kilometers of the planet. But today, something impossible appeared in the sky above the capital city. A single human ship materialized in orbit, somehow having passed through all the defensive screens, sensor networks, and weapon platforms as if they did not exist. The ship was not large compared to the massive vessels that had been appearing throughout the war zone, but its very presence above the homeworld sent panic through the planetary government. Emperor Vashatar stood on the observation deck of his palace, staring up at the ship that hung in the sky like a dark star. His military advisors were shouting orders, trying to understand how their defenses had been bypassed, but the Emperor was remembering his grandfather's stories. The ship began broadcasting a message, and the voice that came from it spoke in perfect Old Korthak, the ancient language of the Empire that few people still knew. "People of Korth," the voice said, "you have broken the oldest law in the galaxy. You have hunted human children, experimented on human civilians, and violated every principle of civilized warfare. Now you will learn why the ancient warnings existed." Emperor Vashtar activated his personal communicator. "This is Emperor Vashatar. I demand to speak with your commander." The response came immediately. "Your Majesty, this is Captain J. Wan of the human vessel Final Justice. We are here to offer you one chance to avoid the complete destruction of your civilization. You dare threaten the Korthak Empire with a single ship? Your Majesty, this is not a threat. This is a promise. You have 1 hour to order the unconditional surrender of all Korthak forces. If you refuse, we will demonstrate why your ancestors wrote warnings about humanity." The transmission ended, leaving Emperor Vashatar staring at the ship that somehow made his entire planet feel small and vulnerable. Meanwhile, on the other side of the galaxy, Colonel Siak Jin was leading human forces in an assault on the research stations where human civilians had been held for experimentation. What his troops found in those facilities would haunt them for the rest of their lives. The Korthak had not just been studying human reactions to fear and pain. They had been trying to understand what made humans dangerous, what psychological triggers turned ordinary people into threats. They had been testing human children to see at what point they would break. They had recorded everything. Colonel Seok-jin stood in a laboratory filled with cages that had held human families, watching video recordings that showed Korthak, scientists separating children from their parents to study stress responses. The recordings showed humans being subjected to increasingly harsh treatment, while the scientists documented their reactions. But what the scientists had discovered terrified them. Instead of breaking under pressure, humans had begun to adapt, to learn, to plan. The recordings showed prisoners systematically studying their captors, memorizing guard rotations, analyzing weaknesses in the facility's security. "Sir," said one of his soldiers, "we found the main data core. Everything is here. Recordings, experimental data, analysis reports. All of it." Colonel Seok-jin looked at the thousands of files that documented the torture and experimentation performed on human civilians. Children as young as 5 years old, families torn apart for scientific study, people treated like laboratory animals. "Transmit everything to Fleet Command," he ordered. "Every file, every recording, every piece of data. The galaxy needs to see what they sanctioned when they allowed this war to begin." As the data transmission went out across human space, it reached the command ships of the sleeper fleets. Admiral Minsu stood on the bridge of Never Again, watching the recordings that showed what had been done to human families.
Human children. His expression never changed as he watched.
But everyone on the bridge could feel the cold anger that radiated from him. When the final recording ended, he turned to his communications officer. "Send a message to all fleet commanders," he said quietly. "Operation Reckoning is authorized. No mercy, no prisoners, no survivors." "Sir," said his tactical officer, "are you sure?" "The Galactic Council is requesting a ceasefire. They're saying they want to negotiate." Admiral Minsu looked at the tactical display that showed the positions of Korthak forces throughout the galaxy. "The time for negotiation ended when they started experimenting on our children. Begin the operation." Throughout human space, the sleeper fleets began to move. Ships that had been waiting in the darkness for 200 years finally revealed the weapons they had been developing in secret. Technologies that could move stars, weapons that could tear holes in space itself, defenses that existed in dimensions the Korthak could not even detect. Engineer HFY worked frantically aboard the command ship as they prepared humanity's final demonstration of power. The sleeper fleets had not just developed new weapons during their centuries in the dark. They had developed the ability to move entire star systems. Gravitational manipulation systems are online, she reported. Dimensional displacement drives are charged. We are ready to begin stellar relocation. Admiral Minsu nodded. Begin the demonstration. Show them what happens when you threaten human children. On Korth, Emperor Vashitar watched through his palace's telescope as impossible things began to happen in space. The star that had given light and warmth to his world for billions of years was moving. Slowly, gradually, but definitely moving away from his planet. How is this possible? He whispered. His chief scientist, her voice shaking with fear, gave him the answer he did not want to hear. Your Majesty, they are manipulating the gravitational fields around our star. They are moving it away from our planet. In approximately 6 hours, Korth will be too far from the sun to sustain life. Can we stop them? No, Your Majesty. This technology is beyond anything we understand. It's beyond anything anyone in the galaxy understands. Emperor Vashitar realized that he was watching the demonstration of power by a species that had spent 200 years preparing for total war. Humans had not just survived in the darkness between stars, they had evolved into something that could move the stars themselves. He activated his communicator with shaking hands. This is Emperor Vashitar. I surrender. Unconditional surrender of all Korthak forces, please. Please stop moving our star. Ambassador Jihoon stood before the emergency session of the Galactic Council, representing humanity as the other species begged for mercy on behalf of the Korthak Empire. The Great Chamber was only half full. Many species had chosen not to attend rather than face the consequences of their decision to sanction the war against humanity. Ambassador, pleaded Council Member Tae-min, surely humanity does not intend to destroy an entire civilization. The humans we know are peaceful, civilized people. Ambassador Jihoon looked around the chamber at the representatives who had voted to allow the Korthak to hunt human children. His voice was calm but carried an edge that made several council members step backward. You are mistaken, Council Member Tae-min. The humans you knew were the ones who chose peace, who chose to follow your rules, who chose to trust in galactic civilization. Those humans are still trying to show mercy. He gestured to the display that showed images from the research stations, the recordings of human children being experimented on, the data that documented years of systematic torture. But we are not those humans. We are the humans who were sent into the dark to ensure our species' survival. We are the humans who remember what our ancestors endured, and who were prepared for the day when galactic civilization would show its true nature. Elder Counselor Vextar spoke from his position. Ambassador, surely there must be some way to avoid total destruction. The Korthak have surrendered. Have they? Ambassador Jihoon asked. The Korthak Emperor surrendered when he realized his star was being moved away from his planet. But what about the rest of you? You voted to sanction this war. You watched them hunt our children and did nothing. You allowed the experiments to continue because you thought humans were weak. The chamber fell silent as Ambassador Jihoon's words echoed through the hall. You broke the oldest law in the galaxy, he continued. You forgot why the warnings existed. You thought mercy was weakness and peace was surrender. Now you will learn what humanity becomes when our young are threatened. The display changed to show human fleets moving throughout the galaxy, systematically dismantling the military capabilities of every species that had voted to sanction the war, not destroying their worlds but making it clear that humanity now had the power to do so whenever they chose. The war is over, Ambassador Jihoon announced. The Korthak Empire will be dissolved. The species that supported them will be disarmed, and the galaxy will remember why the ancient warnings were written. He paused and looked around the chamber one final time. We are not the same humans who left Earth 200 years ago. We are what humans become when their children are threatened. And we will be watching. 5 years later, Captain Hyunwoo stood on the bridge of the exploration vessel New Horizons, leading the largest human exploration fleet in history. The galaxy was quieter now, more peaceful. The sleeper fleets had returned to the dark between stars, their purpose,